John Longworth said to have been pushed out of the business lobby group, the British Chambers of Commerce. When Longworth said he preferred the exit, he stirred up a hornet's nest.
I have come to the conclusion that the European Union is incapable of meaningful reform.
There were no tears in Downing Street.
Let's be honest, everybody knows that your position is changing week by week, and now you've got the cheek. Increasing numbers of people in the Labour Party at the conference this week are talking about a second referendum. So no second referendum.
Crystal clear.
Second referendum. Has anybody heard that?
No second referendum.
Excellent.
Is it a clever plan? Does it really stick to the red lines that Theresa May set out?
I'm amazed Andrea's saying this. I mean, it clearly doesn't stick to the red lines. It isn't Brexit. It leaves supporters who are supporting Leave Means Leave are incandescent with rage.
We need to get on with it. The government needs to get a grip and accelerate the process.
Please welcome to the stage John Longworth and Richard Tice.
Torquay! Welcome, Brexiteers! So nice to be here in Torquay. It reminds me of summer holidays in my childhood. It's wonderful to be here. But we're here today for one thing, and that's to make a big noise so they can hear us in number 10 Downing Street. You know, my Brexit journey started 40 years ago. I've done all sorts of different things in my career, but in all the twists and turns, however senior role I had, I dealt with Brussels for my sins. And you know, that's why I knew back in 2015 what they were up to, what their game was, and that's why I chose to vote Leave. And in that same year, when I was the head of the British Chambers of Commerce, and I was so frustrated and horrified with lies that the government were telling people in Project Fear, they're still at Project Fear now. That's why I decided to speak out. But you know, number 10 went mad. And they put so much pressure on my organisation that I felt the only thing I could do was to resign so I could campaign to leave the EU and speak the truth. But who would have thought it would be here 2.5 years later, after the biggest democratic decision of the British people, still having to reboot the People's Army to make sure we actually leave. Who would have thought that? It's absolutely shocking. And you know, on that ballot paper, it didn't say you've got a choice between remaining in the EU and a really bad fudge deal with the EU. It didn't say remain or let's have a bad deal. It said remain or leave. Just leave. What can't they understand about that? It's very straightforward. So we're here today to say loudly to number 10 and to our MPs, which we all need to write to, leave really does mean leave. So we've got some great speakers for you today, but before we hear from them, let me introduce, ladies and gentlemen, our Vice Chairman and the founder of Leave Means Leave, Mr. Richard Tice. Thank you, John. Torquay, what a fantastic
What a fantastic audience we've got here this afternoon. We know why we're here, ladies and gentlemen, because we are appalled. We're shocked at how incompetent this government have negotiated the Brexit negotiations so far. And the Chequers plan is an absolute disaster. We all know what we need to do with it. We need to chuck it in the bin. When I founded Leave Means Leave shortly after the referendum, I naively thought we might be needed for 6 months or so, you know, to support the government as they got going. Here we are, over 2 years later, and because of this dreadful Chequers proposal, we've had to relaunch the campaign. We're back. Big rallies up and down the country. We've had Bolton, we've had Birmingham. Next week, we're up north again. And better news than anything, the battle bus is back. And you can imagine, I hope you saw it outside, you can imagine the fun we had working out what to put on the side of the bus. Now, being a modest sort of chap, I wanted to put a really, really big number on the side. I wanted to put save 39 billion. Anyway, my colleagues actually voted me down, and I believe in democracy. Unlike some. Don't let anybody tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that it's too late, that we can't make a difference. We can. We can still influence this process. All of us here today, and our friends, our colleagues, our family. This is really, really important. Writing to our MPs, turning up at their surgeries, telling them, chuck Chequers and believe in Britain. We all know in the world of business, no deal is better than a bad deal. That was our original slogan. We also know, let's be honest, no deal, no problem. No deal, no problem. Forget all this scaremongering. Apparently we're going to run out of cheese, we're going to run out of ham, we can't even watch Netflix. I mean, honestly. You know, you couldn't make some of this stuff up. It's pathetic. But we've got some great speakers, and our first speaker, actually, is a very special person because he is a committed fisherman. And the fishing industry is being royally shafted. Always has been since we joined the common market, and there's a real danger at the moment they're going to be doubly shafted. So I'd like you to bring a real warm welcome to Bracken Pearce, who's going to give us a few minutes about how the fishing industry is being so let down by this government. Bracken, welcome to the stage. Brilliant. Come over here.
Good afternoon. I'd just like to get a few facts across about how important a true Brexit is to the fishing industry. Currently, at the moment, European vessels hold 90% of the channel stocks. Of the species, those stocks are at the moment, our main targets for everyone like haddock. The European Union holds 92%, we hold 8%. Sorry, that was cod. It's much the same for haddock, it's 90%, we hold 10%. After Brexit, if we get the Brexit we was promised and we all voted for, our cod would go, European would go down to 30%, we would go to 70%. Haddock. Haddock, post-Brexit, 35%, we would get 65%. For all species across the UK, it would regain a £6 to £8 billion industry. These resources would be used to rebuild local communities, especially in the southwest. That would be extremely important. Sorry, I got a bit lost here. The transition deal for the fishing industry is fatal. While in the transition period, we have no say over European law which they can implement upon us. They could, within their rights, implement rules which would completely decimate the UK fishing industry, meaning so if we haven't got the fishing boats and resources to catch the fish within our waters, they automatically gain the right to catch our fish. So by the time we leave, it'll be over anyway. So that's why we have to leave now. And that's the main points, really, I can get across today without going on too much. There's only the people who can do it for us, and that's the politicians, not us, so it's up to them now.
Oh, thank you very much. Brilliant. You know, I mean, a true committed tradesman, an incredibly dangerous trade, and being utterly let down by our politicians. Our next speaker is one of Britain's greatest entrepreneurs. An incredible guy. He's been a huge supporter of the Brexit cause, whilst running, by no means and by no small feat, running a chain of almost 1,000 pubs. You know, it's a great business. He's given his time, his energy, his efforts throughout the Brexit campaign. He's had the courage to stand up and be counted, unlike many business people. So we're very lucky to have him. Let's just, before we welcome him to the stage, let's just see a couple of clips of our first speaker in action.
Wetherspoon, the chain of over 900 UK pubs, printed 200,000 beer mats criticising the EU and the IMF. And now the pub group's founder, Tim Martin, is taking the debate to his drinkers personally, visiting 100 of his pubs across the country, talking to customers and encouraging them to vote out.
I think it's probably overplayed. Economists got it completely wrong about the outcome of the referendum.
For example, that food prices will rise, that's come from big business, and it's not true.
So we believe the country would be better off with no deal because it's a protectionist system, so why not say it?
Please welcome to the stage, Tim Martin.
Thank you very much, everyone. Sincerely appreciate the very warm welcome. Thanks especially to Nigel, Jacob, John, Richard. These guys having to hack around the country a hell of a lot, which I do for a living, so that's okay for me. But it's seriously hard work being away from your family, being on the road this much, and they've all done a tremendous job. Someone like Nigel over, what, 20 years? It's a funny thing, this Brexit stuff, because as a kid at school at 15, 16, reading my history books, I thought, well, it's obvious, isn't it? You need democracy in the world, and that's the only thing that can ensure the survival of humanity, because Australia won't invade New Zealand, America won't invade Canada, provided they're democratic. And I personally feel that that's at the root of the issue. You and I probably believe that we could disarm completely in this country, and provided our old rivals across the channel were democratic, we'd be under no danger whatsoever. So it's democracy that creates peace. The other thing that democracy... Thank you. The other thing that democracy creates is prosperity. And sometimes it seems chaotic, but it does work. Look at Japan. In about 2 or 3 decades after it became democratic, became the second biggest economy in the world. It never had any of the stuff that America had before that. Look at South Korea, astonishing success, similar standard of living to us versus North Korea. And even a terrific example is North America, who shook off the English king, were determined to be democratic in the future, created the Constitution 200 years ago that enshrines democracy, incredibly successful. Look at poor old South America, had tremendous problems because they haven't had the same level of democracy. So it is a fantastic thing. Unfortunately, a lot of intellectual people, and this is at our highest universities and in the highest echelons of the land, don't quite believe that. Their instinct is it's better if things were run by people like us. And they've... So they've transferred gradually over the years a lot more and more power to Brussels, which is not democratic. It's got 5 unelected presidents. It's got a court which isn't subject to national parliamentary control, which isn't democratic. MEPs can't even initiate legislation. I'm afraid to say it's really a mock parliament. And like all people who aren't properly accountable to the public, it's accruing more power to itself as time goes by. The poor old Greeks are friends because we're not anti-European people. We like European people. They're our friends and allies. But as time goes by, the people at the centre are accruing more power to themselves. They've created the euro, and that means that national parliaments in Greece and Spain and elsewhere have lost control of interest rates and budgets, hugely important democratic controls. And of course, people get very frustrated and angry if they don't control those sort of things. So the government's tragedy, I think, in all this is that it hasn't prioritised leaving. What it's done is prioritised a deal, and that, of course, as any people, you don't have to be Warren Buffett or work for Goldman Sachs to know if you say, I must have a deal, that's my main priority, what's going to happen? Richard used the word, and shafted comes into mind. But we don't need a deal. And the reason is that most people don't know it because it's invisible, but when you go into the shops, you're paying tariffs on 12,651 goods, including rice. Are the rice growers of the UK going to worry if we abolish those tariffs? Coffee, I haven't yet seen those on any Devon or Cornwall farms. Oranges. New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, how sacrilegious is this? When you go to your fridge and have a glass in the evening, 4 or 5p is collected by the British taxman and sent to Brussels. So but most people don't understand this, and this is where the unscrupulous Remainers are trying to frighten the public. This is the core of Project Fear. What they're trying to say is, food prices will go up if we leave the EU. You'll read that again and again. It's in the head of which the Consumer Association said that yesterday, reported in the Daily Mail, which used to be for us, but shockingly no longer is. What actually happens is we can abolish those tariffs, prices in the shops will go down, you will be better off and the public will be better off, but very unusually, the government won't lose any income because the tariffs wend their way to Brussels. The second thing that we can do is save 39 billion quid. That's 60 million per MP. And invested in the UK. And the third thing we can do is regain control of fishing. This is on the 29th of March next year. Now, what worries me and what worries you, and I think what worries everyone, is that we're really dealing with a giant filibuster. If you leave it to the 29th of March and then have a transition period and then maybe extend it a bit more, just waiting for some circumstances which you can blame on Brexit. At some point there's going to be an economic downturn. They think if they can just drag it out long enough, blame it on Brexit. So it's really a question of taking charge of our own destiny. But one of the things that's being said is we're going to have chaos at the borders and 50% of our trades with the EU. I think Weatherspoons tried to call the bluff of the government and other people on this issue. We said, okay, what we'll do then is we won't buy anything from Europe. But I don't want to be horrid, genuinely so, to our European suppliers who've done nothing wrong, because they too, in a way, are victims of the Brussels regime. But at the same time, I think now there's no alternative. So just to show what can be done, there is nothing that you can buy from Europe that you can't buy from the rest of the world. 93% of the rest of the world is outside the EU. So we've switched from Courvoisier brandy to the number 2 in America, which is a very good brandy. It sells more than Courvoisier in America. That's good enough for me. I spoke to one of our customers in Birmingham the other day who happened to order it when I was standing beside him. And I said, do you like this E&J brandy as much as Courvoisier? He said, well, I think it tastes the same, but I like it a lot better because I can pronounce E&J. But there's massive opportunities out there. So the number 3 spirit in pubs in the UK now is one called Jägermeister. And again, I don't want to be horrid to our German suppliers who've been good suppliers, but we've switched from Jägermeister in the rolling Bavarian hills to Striker from Chorley in Lancashire. And it's selling more than Jägermeister. But, you know, we do believe in free trade, but there's an opportunity now for British suppliers and also for non-EU suppliers, American brandy suppliers or whatever. But I think the main point about this is now for the public. People are saying, what can I do? What can I do? Well, you can do that. And I think it's possibly likely to happen. But I think what you can do now is, without bankrupting your local BMW car dealer, use your intelligence, use your intelligence, and make pro-UK or non-EU choices. Why buy a French Merlot? Buy one from Australia, because that's what we're being told. You won't be able to buy the. It's time now for the public to use their economic power and to switch your purchases in a sensible way in the supermarket to things from the UK and outside Europe. So I think that's the only point I want to make. But someone said to me the other day, you know, are you going to lose? And there's no way of losing, because this is a quest for self-determination. And just like, let's be fair, you know, just like the Irish had against the UK, that's fair enough, we can understand that now. And India had, and North America had. But people want control of their destiny, and they're going to do it. Thank you very much indeed.
Isn't he? Yeah, so perfect. Isn't he fantastic? Isn't he fantastic? And doesn't he simplify things, you know, so that we understand pounds, shillings and pence? One of our greatest entrepreneurs. It's really interesting that the greatest British entrepreneurs in this country, the James Dysons, the Anthony Bamfords, the Tim Martins of this world, they're all Brexiteers. And they're all quite happy to leave with no deal, no problem. And Tim clearly said how that can be done. So to our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, who needs little introduction. But it is worth just pausing for a second and reminding ourselves just what he has achieved. Over the last 25 or so years, he has battled relentlessly for the cause of Brexit. He's possibly the original greatest Brexiteer ever. Slowly and surely, he has changed the course of British political history. And history will without question show him as one of the greatest, most influential political figures in our country since the Second World War. The courage that he has shown in the face of unbelievable abuse and vilification and ridicule from parts of our establishment and the media, and the threats to his own personal security and that of his family is quite extraordinary. There's a wonderful example of that courage when, on one election day a few years ago, he was, battling for the cause. He was in an aeroplane, and it crashed. It would have killed many people. But thankfully, not our Nigel. He pulled himself out of the plane, wiped away the blood from his forehead, dusted himself down, reached into his pockets, and lit a fag. That's courage, ladies and gentlemen. He is one of the greatest patriots ever of this country. Before we welcome him to the stage, let's just see a clip of him in action.
It sounds as if you smell betrayal in the air.
The compromise that she put forward at Chequers last week, the PM's country home, frankly was a betrayal. I'm going to try and get the people to let their members of Parliament know they will not accept being betrayed. And I tell you what, if I have to do this again, next time, no more Mr. Nice Guy. We had a referendum. We voted for something. Our politicians should deliver this. We have made our minds up in the greatest democratic exercise in the history of this country. I trust the voice of the people more than the politicians.
Please welcome to the stage, Nigel Farage.
Hello, Torquay! I want to thank our chairman today, Richard Tice. I think, just to put me in the right frame of mind before coming to speak to you, he reminds me of my aeroplane crash in 2010. Thank you, Richard. Just what I needed. And whilst we're on this spirit of unity within Leave Means Leave, the chairman was wrong. He described me as the first Eurosceptic. I'm sorry, but that, in fact, was Henry VIII. Because that split from Rome was equally as historic as this split from Rome. Ladies and gentlemen, let's just be absolutely clear what's happened here. On June the 23rd, 2016, we had a referendum in this country. A referendum that was given to us, the British people. A referendum that I don't think the establishment really wanted to give us, but they were concerned about the rise of a particular political leader they weren't very keen on. And we had a referendum, and despite the fact the government massively outspent us, do you remember that leaflet? That leaflet that Cameron put through every door in the land, spent 9 million quid of our money on. How I enjoyed posting that back through the door of number 10, I got to tell you. But despite them outspending us, despite the best efforts of the neutral BBC, oh, yeah, audience of very strong opinions, clearly. And despite the fact that virtually every big business leader, the multinationals, told us we'd lose jobs, we'd be in misery. The Chancellor of the Exchequer, do you remember that pasty-faced bloke called George Osborne? Telling us there'd be an emergency budget, interest rates would go up, predictions of doom, global leaders telling us we had to vote to remain, including, of course, the then President of the United States of America, Barack Obama. Despite being told that plagues of black locusts would descend upon our land, we stood up, we ignored them, and in what was the greatest exercise in democracy in the history of this great nation, we voted to leave. But even more important than the fact we voted to leave, we were told in that leaflet that Mr. Cameron sent out to us, we were told by the leaders of the Conservative parties and the Labour parties that whatever the result, they would respect the decision and it would be implemented. And here we are. Here we are. 2.5 years on. We now have a Labour Party quite prepared to turn its back on the 5 million of its own voters who wanted us to leave, now contemplating support for a second referendum and for keeping us in the single market. But if that wasn't bad enough, we have a Prime Minister who stands up and says things like, a little bit of that, you know, and well, Mark, you. It's the first time she's looked human for 10 years, so let me give her that. But we have a Prime Minister that stands up and says Brexit means Brexit. A Prime Minister that stands up, I'm sure they wind her up at the back in the mornings, and says we're going to take back control of our laws, our money, and our borders, says we're going to leave the common fisheries policy, and well done. Brave lad coming up on that stage earlier on. Not easy. Not easy getting up in front of an audience of this size. Very difficult. I'm always nervous every time too. Believe that, you believe anything. Anyway. But the point about this is, what really matters here isn't just the issues, though they do. And isn't it funny? As we've heard already from Tim and from others, if we leave with no deal on WTO rules, it is no problem. Just look at Southampton and Felixstowe every day. Look at the huge vessels that come in from China, that come in from America. We do vast amounts of business with these countries on WTO rules. Most trade done in the world is done on WTO rules. So no deal, no problem. But here's the bizarre thing, and this is where the betrayal is, I think, at its worst. For 20 years, because that's how long I've now been in the European Parliament. They love me over there. Who are you? No. Well, you're not laughing now, are you? Yeah, Chairman Richard told me to keep it serious, so I am. For 20 years I've been there, and everybody from, as he was then Commissioner Kinnock, Oh, he's obviously out of fashion. I thought Kinnock would have got a bigger boo than that, but never mind. But everybody from Commissioner Kinnock to Giscard d'Estaing, all through those 20 years, people have said to me, if you want to leave our political union and replace that with a free trade agreement, that is on offer. And in the last few weeks, we've had Donald Tusk, even Monsieur Barnier. He's not arrogant, is he? We've had them saying if Britain wants a free trade tariff deal, it is on offer. We don't need a tariff deal to do business, but it kind of makes it easier. I'm sure Tim would agree with that. And they're offering it to us, and yet our government won't accept it. Because the truth is that when Mrs. May says Brexit means Brexit, what she actually means is Brexit means Remain. She intends, as we saw from that speech she gave in Florence, funny, isn't it? We spend 4 decades trying to opt out of bits of the European Union, and upon getting a vote to leave, we now spend 2 years trying to opt back into bits of the European Union. And she made that clear in her speech in Florence. She wants us to stay part of European agencies. She wants us now, after March the 29th, to stay in a customs union, we're told, until the end of 2021, by which she means until the next general election, when she stands up and says, please trust us and we will deliver Brexit. This transition period and this staying in the customs union is wrong for 2 principal reasons. The first is we are not able, during that period, to take any advantage of that Brexit vote. We will not be able to take back control of our territorial fishing waters, as we damn well should. We will not be able to lift a finger to help any of the 5.2 million men and women out there running their own businesses, acting as sole traders, acting as unpaid tax inspectors for the government, overburdened by bureaucracy, beaten down by regulatory authorities, those men and women who provide 60% of the jobs in the private sector in this country, and without whom our entire economy could not exist. They contribute far more than the firms of a CBI, and we need to help them. We will not, during Mrs. May's period, be able to negotiate any of our own other trade deals around the world, despite the fact the world's biggest economies are queuing up to do that with us, including, and I suggest to you this matters, including those countries from the Commonwealth, those countries who like us, those countries who in time of trouble come and stand beside us, and Brexit is a chance to reach out to those communities and those countries. We will not, under Mrs. May's plan, be able to introduce any immigration controls whatsoever. And most of us who voted Brexit believe that our post-war policy of a net migration figure of about 30,000 a year kind of worked. But the modern policy, the one with an open door to Europe and being lax with the rest of the world that we saw under Blair, under Brown, and under Cameron, of over 300,000 people a year net coming to this country, is wholly unsustainable, bad for working communities. And one of the reasons we voted Brexit is we voted to take back control of our borders. And none of that can happen. None of that can now happen if Mrs. May's plan goes through. And of course she goes off, doesn't she, to Brussels on Thursday to the next European summit. And the second reason why this current course of action is wrong There is something even more fundamental, folks, going on here than arguments about why it's right or wrong to leave the European Union. We had the people's vote in 2016. We made our decision. We made a democratic choice. And for this government to attempt to leave us half in and half out is not just to betray the people that voted in this referendum. It is to devalue, possibly permanently, the bond of trust that needs to exist between the electors and the elected that keeps us a free and peaceful country. We have got together under Leave Means Leave, and we're people from all political parties and none. We're people from business, we're people from civil society. We don't recognise the issues of left or right as even being relevant to the issue of getting Brexit delivered. This is about right and wrong, and we want Brexit delivered. So we ask you to do your bit. You could, if you wanted to, write to your MP, and you'll notice on the back of this leaflet, it's rather good, isn't it, really? The EU ball and chain and the kitten heel. It says quite a lot to me. On the back, you'll notice the names of all the local MPs in this area, including, of course, one, Sarah Wollaston from Torquay. A woman who initially said she would support the Leave campaign, but then, of course, she wanted to get elected, didn't she? Very soon turned turtle and is now pushing for a second referendum. I don't want you, if you live in Torquay, to just write to Sarah Wollaston. I want you queuing up outside her constituency office. I want you to go and meet Sarah Wollaston and tell her, and tell the other MPs, if they betray this Brexit vote, if they betray this exercise in trust that was conducted by the British people, then you will never, ever vote for them again. But please, folks, when you go and meet your MP and speak to them, do so politely. Do so the English way. Do not stoop to the levels of behaviour that we've seen on many occasions from the other side. We are better than that. We are better as people. We believe in our communities. We believe in our country. We come from possibly the greatest nation that has ever been seen in the history of mankind. And what we need to do is to believe in Britain, to believe in our ability to govern ourselves. I genuinely never thought, after that glorious morning of June the 24th, and by the way, I still think June the 23rd needs to be a public holiday called Independence Day. But I never thought after that day I would need to be back on any stage or any platform whatsoever. I perhaps naively thought that they would carry out our will. It is now clear they will not carry out the chosen position of the British people. So what we now need to do with Leave Means Leave is not just have rallies around this country, it's not just get you to go and lobby your MPs. We will now need to rebuild the people's army that helped us deliver Brexit, and I ask you to volunteer, I ask you to join, I ask you to help us. We've got a big short-term battle over the course of the next few weeks, and I hope that those members of Parliament who are committed to delivering Brexit have the courage to stand up and do so. But we could be in, I'm sorry to say, for a much longer fight to get that result delivered. Well, I'll tell you something, if we are in for that long fight, I'm in for it, and I'm hoping you are too. Thank you. All right. Great stuff. We've got them up there. Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. Whee! Whee! Brexit! Brexit! As you can see, ladies and gentlemen, he's pleased to be back. He's really just warming up. It's incredible. And he's such a motivator, as is our next speaker, ladies and gentlemen, who also, before he became a Conservative MP, was himself an entrepreneur. He created a business. He understands about employing people, about cash flows and profits and balance sheets. And now, in the House of Commons, without question, he is the politest, best dressed, most eloquent member of the House of Commons. And to prove that, he holds the record for using the longest word ever in the House of Commons. I can't pronounce it. It's 28 letters long. If he's feeling good this afternoon, he may give you a little taste of it. He holds an incredibly important role at the current time because he's chairman of the European Research Group of Brexiteer MPs, and they hold a critical function in helping to chuck this dreadful Chequers proposal. So before we welcome him to the stage, let's just see some clips of him in action.
These Conservatives say they want Britain out of the customs union and the single market.
The agreement at Chequers went against the spirit of the government's previous policies.
You thought we were getting to the point where you wonder whether the government really wants to leave at all?
Beginning to be a feeling that we are modelling ourselves on the Grand Old Duke of York, that we get marched up the top of the hill and we get marched down again.
Aren't we just still acting as if we are in the European Union, we're bound by the European Union, we are lackeys of the European Union?
Wouldn't you like a debate and discussion about that? Yeah, OK, but don't you think... All right, well, let's leave that. Let's leave my despicability to one side, because what's important is to have the discussion. The United Kingdom Parliament, the most ancient democratic parliament in the world, has been made powerless.
Please welcome to the stage, Jacob Rees-Mogg, MP.
Take it that all those cheers were because it's actually Margaret Thatcher's birthday, the 13th of October, for one of the really true inspirational Eurosceptics who set the tone when she said no, no, no to what Europe was developing into and made it clear that the United Kingdom could never be part of that. And it is in that spirit that I want to remind you actually of how marvellous and courageous and determined you all are. Because as Nigel alluded to, we were warned of all sorts of terrible things that were going to happen in Project Fear, of the 800,000 jobs that were going to be lost, of the punishment budget that was going to happen. And the British people, led and inspired by people like you who were willing to be on this side before it was a winning cause, before it was fashionable, decided that they weren't going to be bullied, that they were going to stand up for what they believed in, stand up for democracy, and make sure that we restored our freedoms. And we see Project Fear continues. I hope you've noticed the latest set of announcements, because I imagine you are all very worried about what has come out, particularly on the thought that caviar is going to be more expensive. I do understand that the plump panjandrums in Parliament may be worried about the price of caviar, but if that is the only cost we have to bear on leaving the European Union, I think we'll just about cope. And that, I think, shows the ludicrous nature of Project Fear, that it is trying to think up anything and everything it can to make us believe we are a weak country. But we're not a weak country, we are a strong country, a great country, not only by our history, but by our future. And it seems to me that there are two types of politician. There are those who believe that they are in politics to manage the decline of a weak and failing nation. And there are politicians who believe that we remain a great nation and have great opportunities ahead of us. I'm afraid the government is now in the business of managing decline. It doesn't think that Brexit can be a success, and therefore it must ameliorate the consequences. I think Brexit is this stunning and exciting opportunity that we must grasp for and embrace and take on full-bloodedly. Why do I think that? Well, first of all, and most simply and straightforwardly, we will make better decisions for ourselves than other people can make for us. And that... And that is true. That is true of us as individuals, as us as society, and as us as a nation. We know what is our interests better than bureaucrats do, elites do, or international bodies do. And that confidence in democracy, even when it gives the result you don't want. I didn't want the election result we had in 1997. But it was a legitimate result, and actually, in the long term, has led to greater opportunities for this country. Sometimes even the best political parties get tired and need to be refreshed. Democracy leads to creativity, to opportunity, and to success. But I go further than that, because the economic chance that we have by leaving the European Union is enormous. Look at that European economic model. It has failed in every degree, and the more extreme it is, the more it has failed. The acme of failure is the euro. The euro, that great destroyer of young hopes and young jobs, the creator of depression across southern Europe. Why should we want to be in an organization that does that when we can make ourselves the freest of free trading nations across the world? We can make consumer prices cheaper for everybody, particularly in food, clothing, and footwear, helping the least well off in our society the most. Isn't that an exciting thing to be doing? And we can regulate according to our own needs. Wasn't it scandalous what we heard about the cod supplies? 92% of the quota not going to British fishermen, but going to continental fishermen. Now look, I wish those fishermen, whatever country they come from, well. They are brave individuals doing a difficult job. One as a landlubber I would not wish to do myself. But I want the resources to benefit our economy. And I think we should have regulations that help our fishermen in our domestic waters rather than continental fishermen. But that's just a starting point. I want James Dyson to be able to make his excellent hoovers, or vacuum cleaners, as I probably ought to call them, or Dysons, as we will no doubt call them in future generations. I want him to make ones that are efficient for people to use in this country, not to help German industry. Again. And I don't know if we have any members of the Green Party here, but if we do, the Green Party was at one point very Eurosceptic, because the European Union, by putting tariffs on Chinese photovoltaic cells to protect an inefficient German industry, made it harder and more expensive for people to have green energy. So whatever spectrum of politics you're on, whether you are a hard-nosed right-winger or whether you are a green lefty, you have... As an aside, I went to a lunch yesterday and the vegetarian option was salmon. I thought that wouldn't particularly please... I'm leaving that to one side. Wherever you are, you see the benefits of leaving and taking back control. And we've got the board here, behind me somewhere. Here it is. No deal, no problem, other than, of course, for caviar. But even if there are problems, and there may be some, there may be a punishment Brexit. Bear that in mind. But what is our response to a punishment Brexit? What is always the response to a bully? You stand up to a bully. You don't... Dare I say, we've stood up to the French once or twice before. Normally rather successfully. And that must be the message. If there are queues at Dover, if the M20 becomes a car park, if there are certain difficulties for a short time because the EU decides to cut off its nose to spite its face, if the EU is a mafia-style organisation that says if you want to leave, we will kneecap you, then all the better for leaving, because you have to get out of that organisation. But let's prepare ourselves for that. You see, what we want to do is be ready to leave, not just in terms of administrative matters, but we need to be ready to leave emotionally and to say, we are reaching for a great prize. We are reaching for an exciting prize, a transformation of our nation's history. And if there's a few weeks' problems, if there is a punishment Brexit, that's not going to deter us. That's going to invigorate us, because we will know what we are doing is right. And let me give you one piece of reassurance. You may read in the newspapers that Tory MPs are getting a bit frit, to use Margaret Thatcher's word, a bit nervy, likely to back down in face of the terrors and the patronage that come forth from Downing Street. Well, let me deal in the floxy-knocky nihilipilification of these appalling rumours. Because, as I point out to the whips, there are probably 39 Tory MPs who are more tough-minded on this issue than I am. I am not the most tough-minded amongst my friends within the Conservative Party. And those 39 will not turn. I will not turn. And there are growing numbers. There are growing numbers beyond that who are determined that we should deliver on the Brexit that we promised. Why? Because the future of our country is at stake. The future of our party is at stake. The opportunity for the United Kingdom is within grasp. It is so exciting. We are so nearly there. We must make sure that Chequers is binned, that this idea of a customs union, this sheer lunacy of paying £3.5 billion a year to subsidise the European Union for all eternity, is binned. We are so close. We are almost there. We just need to be steady for a few more weeks. And if we do that, the prize is there to be grasped. With your support, we will grasp it. Thank you.
We'll do the Q&A.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we've got a few questions and answers from the floor. You've kindly provided us with some questions that you want to ask the panel. Just before I mention these, I'd like to share with you my favourite latest project fear. Apparently, if we leave the European Space Agency, we will now have to rely on the Americans to tell us when an asteroid is about to crash into the Earth. Jill Napier, is it Jill? From Wigan, has asked the question. How long is a temporary customs union in May's world? Maybe we could ask Jacob that question.
In 1853, William Gladstone, in a budget speech lasting 4 3/4 hours, said that income tax was a temporary measure which would be phased out in 1860. The 1911 Parliament Act says in its preamble that it is a temporary measure until a more democratic method of having a second chamber is discovered. Temporary means eternal.
So, Bill Hunt from Tavistock has asked the question, why do we have to pay the 39 billion? Perhaps Nigel could answer that.
We don't have to. It's just that the Prime Minister agreed to pay that sum of money once she'd decided upon a transition period. The transition period effectively was an extended period of membership. So we go on paying a net £10 billion a year during a transition period, during which, folks, we have no vote, no say, no ability to be in the room whatsoever. I think it's what we call a vassal state, Jacob, isn't it? To sort of quote you.
What a brilliant phrase.
So the answer is, you know, John, the answer is, actually, the truth of it is, we've been pumping in hundreds of billions of pounds to the European Union, whose accounts have not been signed off for the last 20 years in a row. Our money has been very badly spent. Frankly, given what we paid them, and given that we're being generous enough to say that we will go on buying their motor cars, buying their goods on a tariff-free basis, I think we just call it quits and say, let's be good neighbours, good friends, and good trading partners. It'll suit everybody.
So final question from Peter Elliott from Oxford, and I think I'll ask Tim, but I'll ask each of the panel also to answer this one. He says, what would happen if we just turned around to the EU and said, we're not going to do anything about the Irish border. If you want a hard border, you do it.
I think that would be very successful for us because there's only a small amount of trade that goes over the EU border in Northern Ireland, and it's not. We've got examples of other types of tariffs and costs which are levied. For example, Wetherspoon transfers beer from the UK to the Republic of Ireland, and we have to pay back, reclaim the duty in the UK, take it over to Ireland, put it into a warehouse, pay duty in Ireland, and then we sell the beer in our pubs in Ireland. There is no border to do that. They just deal with it away from the border in documentation, and that's what we can do in Northern Ireland.
The idea there is no border is absolute nonsense. There is a different income tax rate both sides of the border, a different corporation tax rate both sides of the border, different excise duties both sides of the border. Oh, I nearly forgot. Different currency both sides of the border. All right, there are already massive differences over that border. And do you know something? During that referendum, did any of you ever hear one mention of any problem about the Irish border? In fact, to be fair to Enda Kenny, the previous Irish Prime Minister, he didn't talk about problems on the Irish border. He talked about regretting Brexit, but trying his best to make it work. And then, Monsieur Barnier and the new Taoiseach, Mr Varadkar, who seems to care more about the European project than he cares about Irish farmers and Irish food manufacturers of all kinds, they got together and they found a way to achieve one thing. You know, I obviously see Barnier every month in the European Parliament. He never looks all that thrilled to see me. I can't understand why. But when I went for that formal meeting with him on the 8th of January this year, and I sat down with my lawyer, we had an hour and a half together, I left with one strong impression, that Barnier would do whatever he could to stop us breaking free of single market customs union rules. And do you know why Do you know what they fear with Brexit? They fear us becoming competitive. They fear us becoming successful. And what they've done is they've used the Irish border as a means of frightening Theresa May into this position. I mean, think about this. On December the 8th last year, the elected British Prime Minister left Downing Street at 4:15 in the morning to catch a private flight to Brussels to meet an unelected bureaucrat called Barnier because he had set a deadline. And at that meeting, she agreed to this Irish backstop, which has led to the whole mess that we're in. Can you imagine any of the great men or women that have gone before us in our nation, whether we agree with their politics or not, bowing down to a foreign bureaucrat and leaving at 4:15 in the morning to go and meet their deadlines? It's about time we turned this round and we gave them some deadlines.
Jacob.
The answer is obvious, that we don't need to do anything. The EU has said it won't insist on a hard border. The Irish have said they won't put up a hard border, and the British have said we won't put up a hard border. But the ERG, the European Research Group, went one better than that. We said, what is the European Union's concern, and how do we meet it using existing EU precedent on its other borders? And if you do that, you can meet the requirements of the integrity of the single market, which may or may not be a bogus issue. I mean, I happen to agree with Nigel completely. I think it is a bogus issue, but just accept that it isn't for a moment. If you can solve their concerns, then they've got no excuse for making this border issue the issue that stops a clean Brexit. And our paper set out how you do that. And I'll give you one example. The EU rulebook says that you have to have veterinary checks immediately on the border. And that makes it sound as if you have to have a hard border with checks at the border. Then turns out at Rotterdam, immediately on the border means 12 miles away. So there is already a precedent for not being at the border, and therefore you don't need the hard border checks. But of course there will be differences. They simply won't be implemented at the particularly politically sensitive Irish border. So there is a solution of saying, just go away. But there is also a solution of saying, look, we can meet all your requirements according to all your previous precedents, according to EU law, and therefore let's get on to the next thing. Thank you very much, or else we'll keep our £39 billion.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we're nearly finishing our event. But before we all go, I'd just like to say a few things and also to ask you to do some things for me. First of all, I want to say how proud I am to have spent the day with you today. How proud I am to be British, and how proud I am to be the chairman of Leave Means Leave. It's great to be here with you, and you've made a big noise that can be heard down in Westminster. This was viewed in our previous rallies by over 100,000 people on live stream at home, and 500,000 within a week. So don't think you're alone. There are people out there all over the country who agree with you. The second thing I want to do is to ask you, been asked already a number of times, to write to your MP, to go and see your MP, to put it actually on paper, because you'd be surprised how impactful it is when they get an actual mailbag. So unusual nowadays. The MP's names and addresses are on the back of your leaflets. There's a website on the back of the leaflet where you can put your postcode in and find out who your MP is and their address if you don't already know. There is one final thing I'd like you to do for me. Because here today we're filming for live stream, and we want to send a message all around the country. So the first thing I'd like you to do is to get hold of your boards and stand up. any of the boards. Leave means leave, believe in Britain, save Brexit. We want the whole lot. Stand up, grab your boards. Show the country you mean business. We do. So, after me, let's make a noise. What do we want? Brexit! When do we want it? Now! What do we want? Brexit! When do we want it? Now! What do we want? Brexit! When do we want it? Now! Give yourselves a cheer! Yay! Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you to our panel.